Hi everybody, I'm back. This is lecture number 1 for Unit 5B, European Absolutism, English Limited Monarchy, and Revolutions, like the Scientific and Enlightenment period. Alright, so this is lecture number 1. We're going to talk today about absolute monarchs in Western Europe. This is the longest lecture of this unit series, so don't panic, mes amis. Okay, last unit we learned about that by about 1000 AD, 987 for France and 1066 for England, France and England were on their way to becoming powerful nation-states controlled by monarchs, or kings and queens. These two nations often fought wars against each other for power and influence in Europe, such as the 100 Years' War, which we know wasn't actually 100 years, remember it was actually 116 years, which of course ended in 1453, and which some people believe marked an official end to the Middle Ages, but then further validated these two countries as nation-states. Many other nations are going to take shape during and after the Renaissance, including Spain and the Netherlands. During the Renaissance, and shortly thereafter, we're going to see extremely powerful kings emerge in many European countries. So that's really what we're going to get into today for both Spain and France. Alright, we also know that there was a territory smack dab in the middle of Western Europe called the Holy Roman Empire. By 1555, a king named Charles V ruled this empire. The Holy Roman Emperors were legitimized in history by papal or the Pope's support. Remember? Too legit to quit, hey, hey? Yeah, well,
I was too legit to quit.
by the end of the Renaissance, we're going to see a greatly weakened church. First of all, kings no longer wanted to be ruled over by the Pope. Think Henry VIII in England from our last lecture in Unit 5A. Additionally, with a rising merchant class of people throughout Europe, people were becoming more secular in many ways. However, perhaps the biggest weakening within the Catholic Church was because of the effects of the Protestant Reformation. It seemed clear that the Church was losing its ability to effectively legitimize rulers in Europe. So the Church will lose power to new kings and queens across Europe.
It's all there, black and white, clear as crystal. You get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
You know, really, this entire unit is going to take a look at this whole phenomenon. We're going to see the emergence in Europe of the absolute monarch. Absolutism was a belief that one ruler should hold all the power within their own country or territory. And today I'm going to talk about absolute monarchs in both Spain and France. All right, so let's start with Spain. Remember when I told you all about the royal families in Europe who were often related to one another? Yeah, well, Spain is going to become a country when a leader of the Holy Roman Empire gave his son some territory in Western Europe. Imagine that as your sweet 16th birthday present. Happy birthday, dearie. Here's Spain and the Netherlands. Man, my 16th birthday was spent taking a homeless woman and her kids out for Chinese food. And before you start thinking that I was some community service do-gooder, I wasn't. In fact, I was pretty peeved that I had to share a birthday with my twin sister and share the Chinese food with the complete strangers. Youth. Actually, you know, it was a very nice gesture that I can appreciate more now. So please remember that despite how your parents sometimes act, they do love you immensely. Alright, but that's neither here nor there. I guess if your parents are monarchs, your gifts are going to be great, like countries and stuff. Actually, Philip II of Spain was closer to 27 years old when Daddy gave him this land. Yeah, so when Charles V, Philip's dad, abdicated the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, and that means he gave up the throne and retired, his son, Philip II, was given a lot of land, namely what we now call Spain and the Netherlands, which were then called the Spanish Netherlands, as well as some Spanish colonies in the Americas. Philip later added Portugal to his territory. Philip II found himself suddenly as one of the most powerful men in the world, and Spain experienced a subsequent golden age. They had a huge army, and they had perhaps one of the most prestigious empires in the world during the late 1500s to the early 1600s. Philip's powerful naval force was called the Spanish Armada. If you remember from one of my other lectures last unit, Catholic Philip sent the Armada to England to conquer Protestant Elizabeth I. Remember, it was Philip II who married Elizabeth's older sister Mary, aka Bloody Mary, who later attempted to marry Elizabeth once Mary had passed away. Elizabeth successfully beat Philip II's powerful navy with her much smaller fleet. Anyway, Philip II is considered what we now call an absolute monarch. And this is important, so write it down. An absolute monarch is a king or queen who rules absolutely over their empire. Absolute monarchs believe that they derive their right to rule directly from God. This is called divine right. The period of time following the Renaissance in Europe, between 1500 to 1700, is often referred to as the Age of Absolutism, because there were so many absolute monarchs like Philip II of Spain. All right, well, absolute monarchs had much in common besides the whole divine right factor. Most absolute monarchs attempted to glorify their rule and gain more territory by engaging in trade and warfare, and they helped to usher in a golden age period within their respective countries. For example, Philip II was a patron of the arts. Under his reign, there will be a golden age in Spain. Painters like El Greco and Velázquez will paint the Spanish royal family for generations. Additionally, famous Spanish writers like Miguel Cervantes, who wrote Don Quixote, helped influence European literature. Philip II had a beautiful palace built called Escorial, which today is considered one of the most ornate castles in Europe. So what happened to Spain anyway? Well, the entire empire is going to go downhill. I mean, we've already seen this with so many other empires we've studied so far this year. To all good things must come an end, right? Yeah, so the Roman Empire declined. The Byzantine Empire declined when the Ottoman Turks conquered them, and so too Spain will decline. And there were three reasons why Spain lost its #1 title status. First, Spain's population had grown a lot and food was super expensive. Secondly, Spanish colonies around the globe flooded the Spanish market with silver. This caused massive inflation. The silver just simply wasn't worth as much. And finally, the intolerance Spain had shown from Muslims and Jews in the 15 to 1600s is going to result in the Spanish losing a huge number of their artists, merchants, and skilled laborers. Additionally, Spain was busy trying to fight quite a few foreign wars, which, they were pretty expensive. They were often fighting the same countries they depended on for trade. Ooh, not too smart. Like, if you depend on your older sibling or your parent to drive you to your friend's house or to the mall, and then you treat your sibling or parents pretty horribly, and maybe you post something mean about them on Facebook, then, someone's not shopping at the Gap anytime soon. You know what I mean? All right, so yeah, the Spanish made enemies of their trading partners. They also lost a lot of their territory, including what later became known as the Netherlands, following a series of religious wars. So yes, how did the Dutch develop a nation? The Netherlands used to be under Spanish control, and they were called the Spanish Netherlands for a long time. Eventually, the northern provinces united and declared their independence, and they adopted Protestantism. So this became known as the Netherlands, and that's how they came into existence. Spain stayed in control of 10 of the southern provinces, which later became known as Belgium. The Dutch had a very progressive society. They actually still do, meaning they were considered forward thinkers of their age. Many Renaissance ideas spread to the Netherlands. Artists like Rembrandt and Vermeer created realistic scenes from secular life during the 1600s. Additionally, the Dutch prospered because of the extensive trading network they set up in the 1600s, including the Dutch East India Company, which had a virtual monopoly on the spice trade in Southeast Asia. Long story short, after Spain lost the Netherlands, we are going to see absolute monarchs attempting to strengthen their grip on their own territories. They will do this using the concept of absolutism or absolute monarchy. As I mentioned before, absolute monarchs rule and justify their rule using divine right, the idea that the king or queen was God's representative on earth, sort of like the church preaching that the Pope was God's representative on earth to Catholics. Consequently, most absolute monarchs felt they were above the law or couldn't be held to the same rules as their subjects. This is going to lead to some tension between absolute monarchs and their subjects. Furthermore, absolute monarchs will further weaken the church as they no longer needed the Pope's endorsement or blessing to maintain power. They made themselves too legit to quit. Hey, yeah, the most famous absolute ruler who we're going to talk about next, is perhaps Louis XIV. Okay, so let's talk about this Louis XIV, aka the Sun King. Why was he called the Sun King, you ask? Well, you know how some people sort of consider themselves the center of the universe? Yeah, those people who seem to think the world revolves around them. You know, like that one ex-boyfriend or girlfriend who thought he or she was all that and more, and so you dumped him or her. Yeah, that kind of center of the universe. So, yes, Louis XIV is what we call the epitome of self-centered. No offense, Louis. Louis actually is quoted as having said, "L'État c'est moi," which translates as, "I am the state." Right, so how did this Louis XIV, and that's XIV, for those of you who are Roman numerically challenged, and guess what, guys, you might just want to review Roman numerals because there are more Louis to come. First off, Louis ruled France, so we're talking about France now. By the late 1500s, France was a pretty chaotic place. First of all, king after king had been fighting wars against the English. Catholics and French Protestants, who were called the Huguenots, had been fighting about religion for years. Yes, killing each other. It was a scary time, people. Eventually, a king named Henry IV will come to power in 1589, and he's going to bring peace to France. Henry was the first of the kings from the powerful family called the Bourbons. Yep, it's spelled like bourbon, like the liquor, but it's pronounced Bourbon. So now you know where bourbon originated. Anyway, the Bourbon family will begin to rule. Henry created peace in France by doing several things. First, he converted to Catholicism to win support of the Catholics. Second, he kept Protestants, the Huguenots, happy by passing a law called the Edict of Nantes. That's spelled Nantes. The Edict of Nantes. It's a city in western France. Anyway, this whole Edict of Nantes allowed Protestants to freely practice their religion without persecution or the threat of death. So Henry really stabilized France and created religious toleration. Of course, a religious fanatic stabbed him to death one day as he emerged from his carriage. Man, you know, last year you learned about Gandhi getting killed by a religious fanatic. Wow. So yes, it appears that this has been happening in history long before Gandhi came around. You know, religion is a touchy subject, it would seem. Wait until we get to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, folks. Wow. But I digress. Okay, so Henry IV unified France with his religious tolerance, at least until he was killed. France was later ruled by Louis XIII, Henry's son. The fact in France, however, is that many kings were heavily influenced by other people, especially clergy members from the church. A great example of this was a cardinal from the Catholic Church named Cardinal Richelieu. Please consult your spelling list. It looks like Richelieu, or, you know, however Americans would say that, but it's Richelieu. Okay, although Louis XIII was the king, Cardinal Richelieu called all the shots as Louis's minister. Richelieu immediately got rid of religious tolerance in France, and he persecuted Protestants. I mean, go figure, he was from the Catholic Church, so it would make sense that he would support Catholicism. He then took away power from the nobles, and finally, Richelieu waged war against the other royal families across Europe, namely a family called the Habsburgs. In fact, much of the turmoil and wars that France was involved in inspired a new form of writing to emerge, which was known as skepticism, or this idea that, you know, nothing can ever be known for certain, especially in religion. Great examples of writers who were skeptics included Montaigne and Descartes. Okay, so Louis XIII died, and he left power to his 4-year-old son, Louis. And yes, this was Louis XIV. Finally, right? And because he was only 4, a minister named Massacres ruled for him until he grew up. Yeah, because Louis couldn't immediately take power. I mean, who wants to listen to a 4-year-old? Heaven help us all if my 4-year-old daughter ever gets such ideas. I mean, man, we'd all be required to drink chocolate milk 24/7, eat hot dogs without the hot dog, watch endless episodes of Phineas and Ferb with extra time spent drawing Perry the Platypus. Oh no, we do not want my 4-year-old engaged in absolute rule. But really, folks, Louis did act like a child once he took power at age 22. Wow, you know, Louis's every move became entertainment for his people. I know, no internet, right? Whether it was his grandiose sense of fashion, yes, he did wear high heels because he was only 5'5", or whether he was busy adding to France's territory through foreign wars. Louis XIV is the epitome of an absolute monarch. All right, so Louis XIV should be the first king that you think of when you imagine an absolute monarch. He created a centralized government bureaucracy and a system of intendants. These intendants were people who collected taxes and went around the country making sure people were listening to Louis. He also hired a minister named Jean-Baptiste Colbert who helped bring in money for France through something called mercantilism. Remember mercantilism? It's when you make your country rich by forcing your colonies to make products for you to sell. Anyway, France had many colonies by then in North America. Oh, Canada. Yeah, that. Louis was also known for his religious intolerance, so he persecuted the Huguenot Protestants. Louis also forced his nobles to obey him. How do you control nobles, anyway? Well, Louis is going to build a kick-butt castle called Versailles, which is located about 12 miles outside of Paris. This chateau, that's castle in French if you're wondering, was not just for Louis. Oh no, he forced his nobles to live at Versailles for up to 6 months a year. And although it was a pretty cool and luxurious setup, the main point of making the nobles live there and participate in his way of life allowed Louis quite a bit of influence and control over them. Nobles were even required to watch him get up in the morning and hand him his slippers, newspaper, and coffee. Okay, not the newspaper and coffee part, but the slippers, yes. So I want you to Google Versailles right now while you're listening. Do it, right? That's right, do it. Good. All right, so find the website for Versailles and take a look at the slideshow of pictures. Are you looking at the slideshow of pictures? Yes, that's great. It's pretty magnificent, right? What's your favorite room in the castle? Cool, that's a great one. My favorite is the Hall of Mirrors. All right, I'm sorry to go Dora on you. Yeah, I also think the rooms with the artwork, in other words, every room, are pretty neat too. See, Louis was a patron of the arts. And we've already learned from our Renaissance unit that a patron is someone who has lots of money, and so they will hire other people to create art and literature. Louis was a patron to such writers as Molière, who wrote super snarky comedies. But most of the art that Louis had commissioned was different from the art of the Renaissance. Most of the works he paid for were intended for one thing only, to glorify Louis and make him look good. Like, have you ever walked into someone's house and they have a big portrait of themselves on the wall somewhere? And I'm not just talking about a family photo either. No, I mean it's one of those, hey, look at me type deals. Yeah, well, Louis had those types of portraits all over Versailles. So Louis was also a lover of expensive clothing, shoes, and gold. Yes, the Sun King had gold sun symbols made and placed around the palace. Some rooms looked like they were painted in gold. In addition to his expensive lifestyle at Versailles, Louis further bankrupted his nation by fighting war after war. He invaded the Spanish Netherlands and was constantly at odds with other nations in Europe, especially when it looked like Spain and France would merge to form one big super country or alliance in 1700. See, just a long story short, someone from Louis' Bourbon family was about to take the throne in Spain, and many other European countries were afraid of how powerful Spain and France would become because of this merging of the family. So countries like England and Austria, the Dutch Republic, amongst others, they banded together to fight against Spain and France. They didn't want them to become too powerful. And this conflict became known as the War of Spanish Succession. The result of this whole war was a weakening of France. And, Louis XIV died in 1715 with France greatly plagued by debt. Okay, so both Louis XIV of France as well as Philip II of Spain, they were considered absolute monarchs. And to summarize, absolutism is the term that we use to describe the system of rule used by some European monarchs during the 15 and 1600s. Absolute monarchs believed they had divine right to rule, meaning they were called by God to rule over their people, and therefore had the right to completely or absolutely rule them. These absolute monarchs will engage in much trade using mercantilism to create revenue for their nations. Louis XIV will use much of his country's money fighting wars and building an expensive palace called Versailles. Philip II will also fight many wars and will build a magnificent palace called Escorial. Both monarchs will be patrons of the arts, including painting as well as literature. Thanks for listening. That was the longest lecture. You made it. Good job.